Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 40. We have done 40 of these episodes. We started last year in June and it's now February. We've done these for 40 weeks now. How are we feeling? Paul, we'll start with you.
Doing great. 40 episodes really snuck up on me. Didn't realize we were quite there yet. Lots of good stuff to unpack this week, though. Looking forward to it.
Elliot?
40 does feel like a cool milestone. That's quite a ways, and it's been an awesome journey, and it's only getting better the further we go.
Yeah. We are doing chapters 60 through 64 of Words of Radiance, our first big chunk in part 4. Elliot, we'll start with you this week. Do you have 2 words to summarize these chapters?
I'm going to cheat a little bit this week and sneak in a third, but it's just a little prep. Doesn't count. My 2 words for these chapters are Sea of Spheres.
Okay. We've argued that as long as you hyphenate, it's still one word, so just hyphenate one of those and you're good.
Totally.
So is it Sea of Spheres
or
Sea
of Spheres?
Sea of Spheres.
Okay.
Paul,
Cool. 2 words.
Do you have 2 words?
I do have 2 words. My 2 words for this week are intentional and maniacal.
Okay. Intentional and maniacal and Sea of Spheres. We can discuss these words here in a second. All right, let's talk about maniacal first. I like that word.
Okay. Maniacal, it's very much aimed at the Devar, the Shallan flashback chapter.
Okay.
61. Her dad is very maniacal. I can easily say he's my least, the character I have the most disdain for of everyone we've met. Can easily say that.
Whoa, we've met a lot of people. That's quite the claim.
Yeah, we've definitely met a lot, but I think he's definitely the worst out of everyone we've met.
If animal cruelty is up on your list, then absolutely. So, I could agree with you.
It's more than just animal cruelty, but yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And your other word?
Intentional. It mostly is pertaining to our Kaladin chapter with Dalinar. He is. I'm very happy about it because he's very straightforward and intentional with what he has to do, where they're at. Sounds like I'm talking about a relationship right now, but he's very clear with his intentions in a good way, and it's something that really stuck out to me throughout these chapters. So.
Okay, let's push it back over to Elliot. Your 2.5 words.
So, Sea of Spheres. We're going to talk about this towards the end of the episode, so I don't want to spoil too. I'm going to actually, to explain my words, read you a quote from the end of chapter 64. This is Shallan talking. It's like that sea of spheres. I've fallen in, and it isn't that the water is over my head. It's that the stuff isn't even water, and I have no idea how to swim in it. And I picked that just because I thought that is such a cool metaphor for just how in Shallan is at this point, just how much like the scope of this story has just expanded, and how just we are in the deep end now. We are into the real deal at this point. So we'll talk about why once we get there, but that's why I picked Sea of Spheres.
Cool. We do have a spell check. and it actually has to do with chapters 63 and 64. We have our favorite creepy ghost blood lady who wears a mask all the time, and she gives her name in these chapters, and we're referring to her as this from now on. Eliot always gets to go first here. I don't know if that's a advantage or disadvantage, but Eliot, go ahead.
I think it's an advantage on this word. This one seems perhaps straightforward to pronounce. I would not want to try and spell this, so good luck, Paul. I don't envy you. I want to say this. I definitely in my head every time I came across this name pronounced it as Eatil.
Sorry,
Eatil.
Eatil. Okay.
Eatil.
Paul, how do they say it in the audiobook if you remember?
It's Yatel.
Yatil is how they say
Okay.
it.
And every time we have a spell check, I come in all confident having written my little yes. And then Elliot says it some very different way, and I'm like, wait, what? Excuse me. So for Mrs. Yatel, I went with I kind of shoved the name together and went almost like a Yasna route, but shorter. So I went JAHTL.
You've had better weeks and you've had worse weeks. So it is IYATIL.
It would be. And they say Yatil.
Yatil.
So it's Yatil.
Yep.
Okay, I was just hearing the Yatil. I was like, the Y sounds always a J. And went from there. So
I'm getting the impression, not just from the name, but from a little bit of the dialogue there, that this seems like a character from some place we're not familiar with. Shallan even makes a comment like, "That's a strange name. Like I have no idea where that's from." And so I think you're at a disadvantage here, Paul, in that this I think is intentionally a name from like a region we're not familiar with. So things like the J sound that we're going for, like all those rules get thrown out the window here. I think this is a new race, if you will, perhaps.
Right.
fair.
Let's do chapter 60. Shallan and Pattern are having a pretty typical conversation as far as those two are concerned, which infers Oath Gates and Urithiru and Shallan's past and ignoring Shallan's past and all that cool stuff. So, do either one of you want to pick this up? Any cool things you drew from this chapter?
We get some geography, if you will, to kind of start us off. Shallan is, trying to puzzle things out like she often is, which is very helpful for a first time reader to listen to Shallan kind of process this because it helps us process this too. She's talking about the city of Stormseat as the historical capital of Natanaton. Am I saying that?
Natin.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I'll give you a strike there. That's Natin.
Natanaton. Okay,
Yes.
that place, wherever that is.
I should have done that one.
You probably should have. And she's, theorizing that Stormseat is perhaps on the Shattered Plains, and I guess this it amongst scholars. Some people think it is, some people think it's not. Yasna apparently thought it was on the Shattered Plains. Shallan is going with that. I guess the conclusion we might draw from this is perhaps this is the cities or the ruins of this city is where the Parshendi maybe are living in the middle of the Shattered Plains. I believe they have a name for it that we've heard before. Is it Narok?
Narok.
All the names.
Yep.
Haha, got that one right at least. Narok. Maybe they're living on the ruins of this old city Stormseat, perhaps. At least that's where it's kind of getting. So some names getting thrown around and perhaps helping us get our bearings a little bit. But where she goes with that next is probably the most intriguing part for me. She starts to talk about the 10 epic kingdoms, the 10 historical different segments of Roshar, and she talks about how this isn't the first time we've heard of Oathgate, but we haven't heard a lot about Oathgates yet. Shallan talks about how each city perhaps had an Oathgate in them, and they use these as like portals to travel to Urithiru. And Urithiru had like a conference room with thrones for all of the different kingdoms, and I couldn't help but just think how by that is how like you could have these different kingdoms or planets or whatever with portals that all lead to this one place, and they can all just roll and have a a council meeting with all the different kingdoms and then step back through their portals out to their different kingdoms they're at. So nifty, kind of cool.
Yeah. And just to clarify for our audio readers and listeners and Paul, that epic is EPOCH, not EPIC, which on my first read through I definitely thought it was epic as in, grand or whatever.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Isn't that pronounced isn't that epoch?
We had this conversation before we went live, and I actually think it's epic. But
it's definitely epoch.
I
comment down below
because in the audiobook they say epic.
Really?
Right.
I'll have to go re-listen because I've only ever heard that word epoch.
Yeah, listeners, because I've heard this both ways as well. I tend to lean towards epic, but my brain does also want to say epoch.
Maybe I'm off. If so, that's totally fine.
But no, we're talking about epic as the period of time or this age or millennium kind of context for that word.
Fair.
In my Way of Kings book, I don't know about Eliot's paperback, like mass market Way of Kings. There's an old map of Roshar with like Alethala and a bunch of the old names. That's the era we're talking about here with the 10 old nations.
But how cool is this going to be if Shallan does go out onto the Shattered Plains and somehow finds this portal, takes you directly to Urithiru? Like, man, that's next level technology and stuff right there. We're no longer, just talking about swords and bows and arrows. Now we've got portals that take you across the entire world. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. The magic system that we've gotten so far is very finite so far. It's not very expansive. It's very individual oriented, that the individual has can have magic, shard blades, shard plate, whatever, a spren. But as far as the world goes, it's not super magic oriented yet. So we'll see if that happens. Speaking of spren and self-induced magic, Shallan has some experiments with pattern and holding Stormlight. I believe that's in this chapter, right?
Yep. Yeah, Shallan is growing her abilities, or at least working on it. She's able to imbue pattern with some Stormlight and attach a illusion to him. I don't think she figures out how to get it to look like it's walking yet in this chapter. I think that comes later, but she's learning. She's learning more.
She's also trying to figure out how to have it make sound, and she can't figure that out. And then pattern brings it up to her. It's like, well, you used to be able to do it, and Shallan conveniently blocks that out. So
that is the part that caught my attention as well. Is Pattern making that reference, well, you've done it before. You're like, whoa, what could that mean? And yes, you're right. It triggers like one of Shallan's, blocking the little firewall to block out that memory. And so we know that those are tied with the, traumatic memories that she has of her mother's and perhaps her father's death as well. So somewhere in all that, she has to have created an illusion that spoke. How does that all tie into what we know of what happened? We suspect that Shallan may have been involved or even directly responsible for her mother's death. We're also guessing that she's responsible for her father's death, though we don't know that for sure by any means. How does a illusion work play into that? That I definitely I don't even have any thoughts or guesses that would work yet.
I don't fully get how they're correlated either. I know that Pattern's whole deal is like say a truth or a lie, and the stronger or more recessed, the better. Effectively, like the least known, maybe.
Right.
Um, but we definitely know that as Pattern. I feel like Shallan and Pattern are kind of experimenting with each other here. Um, Shallan's kind of using Pattern to try and figure out more things with Surge Binding, and Pattern is like, "Tell me more about yourself. Tell me about your past trauma." And Shallan definitely pushes back and says, she even says, I believe that um, she is who she is today because she doesn't think about it. She doesn't think about her past. She doesn't talk about it, which is interesting for sure. Um, so that's been a large part of Shallan's development, is finding out what it is that's so deeply recessed that has her so damaged. That's one of the reasons why I really despise her father, like I mentioned before, and we'll see some of that with the flashback chapter. Every time we have a flashback chapter, it's just more horrible things her dad does, which makes me very sad.
We've had the phrase "fake it till you make it" with Shallan, but in some cases it's block it out till you make it. You know, so just forget about it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, with Pattern, probing into Shallan's past and trying to get her to dive back into that and admit what happened. I'm really wondering here if this is Pattern, pushing her to develop her light weaving abilities. Remember, in the past, we saw that in order for Shallan to like level up, if you will, in her light weavingness, she has to share a truth, right? I think one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the like defining moments for her was her admitting that she killed her father, was kind of one of those
Mm-hmm.
moments for her. So I'm wondering if that's what Pattern is doing here. If he's trying to, lead her on into, achieving whatever the next, truth is that she needs to share. Perhaps that's what's happening here in this chapter.
Yeah, Shallan can only. You're right that light weavers have to. That their oaths are admitting truths about themselves, and that's probably what Pattern is doing here, trying to push her into a situation where she has to confront something in order to increase her powers, like she's trying to do here. She's trying to work with her powers, work with Pattern without having to confront all of that stuff that's behind her. Speaking of,
Whatever it is, it definitely makes Shallan not just uncomfortable, but rather terrified of going in that direction.
right. Speaking of Shallan's past, we do have a flashback chapter 61, and Paul, I will throw this to you because you're not a fan of Lindevar at all, and you can rant a little bit if you want about how terrible this chapter is.
I'd be happy too. I'm really glad you tossed it over to me. So this flashback chapter is good. I've enjoyed all of our flashback chapters with Shallan, honestly. It's been an interesting mix, I think, just as an aside, the development. So it started almost in like a riddle sense. It was always some snippet of her past, and kind of confusing and left us questioning. And then now it's more of just actual stories of her growing up, things she remembers normally. Um, so this is a moment where Halloran has left, and the father, Lindevar, is very mad at him. We don't fully know the stuff going on there, but we know he hates him or what he thinks he's gonna do. So, um, ultimately, he orders his assassination. But before that, um, now non-Balat, um, kind of talks to Shallan and is like, "Hey, we should leave. Like, there's all this drama because Balat likes this girl and she's really great. He loves her, and the dad is like, no, like we need someone like from a better family and all this stuff, which you can take that as you will. That's fine. Balat decides he's gonna leave. He's sick and tired of dealing with his crazy father. He's gonna leave, and he's trying to tell Shallan to leave too. And Shallan, actually, I thought this was pretty cool. Like, so her thought was, I can't leave. I need to stay because something kind of has a hold of their father. And if we all leave, then we're just giving him up to it. Um, which does make me really curious. At least has puts a little hope in my mind that maybe the father can be eh, could have been saved or recovered. I mean, he's dead now, but um, she still has faith, which is very like hopeful. Um, but as it goes on, Shallan hears her father basically order the assassination of her beloved brother Halloran. And what really drove me up the wall is at the end. First of all, this chapter is titled "Obedience," um, and at the end, I believe the stepmother, I believe, is titled "Obedience." I think that's right.
Mhm.
At the end, the stepmother kind of steps in and is like, "Okay, like I haven't always been a fan of things going on. I've kind of stuck through this through thick and thin, but like sending an assassin after your own son, like that's too far. Like you can't do this." And he kind of goes berserk. The dad does, storms off and says, "Why wouldn't anyone obey? Like if everyone would just obey, like there wouldn't be any problems." And it just kind of made me sick to my stomach. That moment did. So that's my. I was gonna say short summary, but I feel like I've been talking forever. So
So we
yeah.
know that Lynn Devar is not a great person right now. We
Mhm.
also know that Shallan is the one who ends up killing her father. We don't know how this all goes down yet. But is there any way in your mind that there's any redemption arc at all for Lindovar? Is there any way that you could see him not being the worst person you've ever met in these books?
There is, and the way that happens is one of two things, but I think preferably both. So it was Rust here, I think in this champion one, that Shallan was there when her mom died, but she like has kind of like scraped that from her memory, like doesn't really remember it, but she knows she was there. And Balan even says like, "You were there. You should know how bad Dad is. Like we need to leave." Um, and I'm one way that could be redeemed is if maybe his current state is out of a state of grieving. Maybe he didn't kill his wife and there was some other major tragedy that happened, but it kind of scarred him. The only other thing is like on his deathbed, like maybe he could come to in a sense. um, or like near it. But other than that, I really don't see anything happening as far as a redemption arc.
Elliot, any thoughts about chapter 61?
Continuing on that thought of, redemption possibilities for Lindevar, I too would. I'd go so far as, personally myself, to say that I don't believe any character or person is ever completely beyond redemption. There's always a path back. But what I might say for this instance is, I don't think there's any like he's misunderstood storyline that's going to come out of this. I don't think we're going to get some sort of a, you know he was just, acting to protect himself or his family. I don't think it's ever going to get explained away that what he's doing is okay. I think that he's doing a lot of terrible things. He's ruining his children's lives. He's going to leave them broken, and we've seen just how broken Shallan is. But not say that he's completely beyond redemption. We could see him turn from this and come back towards being a better person. It's possible. Unlikely because he dies, so I doubt he would, head on that path and then die, but we'll see.
One other thing I want to highlight on this before we move on. So one of my two words was maniacal, and I chose that for this specifically. And just looking up like the dictionary definition of the word maniacal, there's like two things I wanted to point out. So like the basic definition is exhibiting extremely wild or violent behavior. Um and that's what I saw, and I was like, that's like pretty much fits to a T. It's very wild and very violent, like, and stuff. But there's another definition. It's less descriptive, but it says suffering from mania. And I thought about that for a little while, in that it's like kind of to a different perspective, that perhaps the dad really is like in a state of suffering from something, right? Not like as much malicious intent, but that he's like a victim almost, of something greater that may have a hold of him, in a sense. And I think with that there could be some redemption arc, or at least the starting of it. Um, but I think both of those seem pretty evident here. So I feel like that definition is pretty accurate for the character and what we've seen.
What I'm most frustrated with Lin as a character is he seems very aggressive in his uh, disciplined stance with his children. It's not like he's not just wanting order in his house. It's almost as if he's getting petty and wanting vengeance against his children. He's doing things that he specifically knows will bother them as a way to punish them for not being obedient. Like, Balat is trying to speak up for their house. He's wanting to go with I don't remember her name, and leave.
Elita?
Yeah, thank you.
Is it Elita?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he goes and kills his Axhound puppies just out of spite. Like, he knows what those mean to him. He knows the journey he's been on from animal cruelty to keeping these Axhounds and caring for them, and he just goes out of his way to make his son's life miserable. And then he threatens Shallan with making sure she stays obedient with beating the staff, and he knows that will keep her in line if he threatens the staff. So he's very systematic on how he's attacking his children and keeping them in line here. That's what frustrates me the most about Lin.
I agree. That, and like, it's very manipulative and very intentionally abusive with exactly what you're saying, and also like at the end, like just tons of threats, and then the whole notion of walking out and be like, man, if everyone just obeyed me instead of talking back, everything. No one would get hurt, and
Right.
it just he's like there's like Lindevar, then there's a space, and then there's like Sadius in them. So that's my current uh
I don't know if I agree, but I understand where you're coming
disdain
from.
tier list. That's my current disdain tier list. But yes, yeah, sure. Yeah, I understand. Sadius is bad. I don't like him either. But it's just at this moment, I very, very much don't like Lindevar.
Yeah.
I
So
think for me it's a different type of dislike, right? You used a word that I've been trying to find it, and I think you hit it. It's abuse. What Lynn is doing is in every definition, in every way, abuse. It's physical abuse, it's emotional abuse, it's, take your pick. He's physically abusing his children and making them think it's their fault and playing on their fears and terrors. Like it's just it makes your blood boil in ways that violence or evil doesn't necessarily. Taking advantage of someone who's not only in a weaker position of you, but they're your own children. Like abusing your children just hits a new low, whereas Sadi is sacrificing the lives of thousands of people he just thinks aren't worthwhile. Like, yes, you could absolutely argue that that's more damaging, more destructive, more evil, even perhaps than what Lindevar is doing. But the abusive nature of Lindevar is doing just like doesn't sit well with you in a way that's worse than what like a Sadius or even perhaps like a Teravangian is doing.
Any more thoughts on 61?
I think I've ranted long enough.
All right. Speaking of rants, 62. Dalinar visits Kaladin. I really like this chapter. I listened and read this multiple times this week, leading up to this, because I'm a big fan of any Dalinar Kaladin interaction, even if they're not on the best of terms at the moment. But Dalinar's reactions and Dalinar's intentions here are very clear and very honorable, even if Kaladin and Dalinar aren't seeing eye to eye right now. Do either of you want to start this and we can go through it?
Yeah, definitely. So before, I guess something I want to mention before we start talking about the Dalinar and Kaladin interaction, because I agree with you, it is fantastic, and I have a quote that I really want to read because it was actually really good. But before we get into that, in the first half of the chapter, we get a little bit of Syl stuff, and then some interesting revelations about Moash and his family, and we get a name coming back that we haven't seen for a while in Rashon.
Yep.
But first, let's talk about Syl for a second, if we can, because at the beginning of this, Syl reveals that she did indeed see a cryptic at the duel, which we know is Pattern. Pattern went to help Renarin during the duel, and Syl noticed that. She again in this chapter, brings up kind of her, "Ooh, I hate cryptics, but I don't really know why" kind of thing. But she spins it in a positive way, actually, that I think might be good for Kaladin and Syl if they would think about this a little more. She spins it at the end of, yes, this means there's a cryptic out there. Yes, I don't really like them. They're maybe not in line with me, but this could mean that there's others like you. There's other people out there that are, knights radiant in the making kind of thing. And that I think would absolutely or could change Kaladin's approach and his mindset and motivations and things if he thought more, there other knights radiant out there? Are there other surge binders working for good? Can I work with them? If he'd think more about that, I think that might help him out quite a bit. And Syl is at least slightly aware of that being the case.
Kaladin certainly has a lot of time to reflect at the moment, so maybe that will dawn on him.
Although it may not go quite as well as I'm thinking once he realizes that it's Shallan,
That it's
who's the
Shallan.
other search finder here. They're on the best of terms. But then we get into Rashon. Rashon shows up again, and this starts to send Kaladin down into yet another spiral. We learn through Dalinar telling the story that it was actually Rashon who was responsible for getting Moash's family thrown into prison and killed. And that's quite the bit of news that it wasn't necessarily Elokar directly. It was more of Elokar was taking advice from the wrong people kind of thing, where Rashon was the person interacting there. So in our mind, at least in my mind, this is now perhaps a mark in favor of Elokar, saying he wasn't necessarily responsible for this. He was just, being influenced by people who aren't fantastic like Rashon. But in Kaladin's mind, it's not a mark for good. It's very much a mark for the worse, because now Kaladin can tie things that happened in his life with Tien and his family back to Rashon and back through Elokar, because
Right.
he's now blaming Elokar for being the one who sent Rashon to his hometown of Hearthstone, therefore now blaming Elokar for the death of Tien and all of that. And that makes this chapter end in a very dark place for Kaladin's perspective.
I think there's a very specific moment in this conversation where Dalinar loses Kaladin, loses his attention, loses his respect a little bit. And Dalinar mentions, without knowing Kaladin's past, he mentions that they removed Rashon to a place he couldn't do any more harm.
Yep.
And the fact that he says that and Kaladin takes that so personal, that's when he switches off and says, I no longer have respect for Elokar. Like, he was already questioning it before that happened, and because Dalinar said that, like, he could have even worded it differently and it would have been okay, but because he said that specifically, Dalinar not knowing what that means for Kaladin, but that I think there's a very specific point where Kaladin turns his brain off and says, no, this conversation isn't going anywhere for me anymore.
I think you're absolutely right. So then we get to the section that you were talking about, Trevor, with Dalinar, and kind of the speech that Dalinar kind of gives, the pep talk, if you will, that he gives to Kaladin. And like we just said, Kaladin's not really hearing what Dalinar is saying here, but he talks about two kind of different things that I do want to talk about. The first is he tries to defend Elokar a little bit in saying that, hey, you as his personal bodyguard, you get to see the man behind the king. You get to see the person who is human, who makes mistakes, and it's wrong to fault him for that. It's wrong to expect the king to be perfect, because he's not gonna be perfect. Whereas kind of from the outside, everyone just sees Grand King Elokar. And so he kind of asks him to, hey, even if you don't respect the man, respect the throne, respect the office that he holds. And Kaladin, I don't know that he really hears that. He definitely isn't respecting that position by the end of the chapter. But what were your guys' thoughts on that before we go to the part that I want to read?
Kaladin, by the end of this, is almost fully on board with what Moash it has motivations for. So going into the duel, Kaladin was prepared to send Moash on a month-long deep patrol, handle Moash's friends with Dalinar, put them in jail, whatever, for a assassination attempt against Elokar, and then protect Moash, but handle that. He's not considering that anymore. He's very much on the side of Moash by the end of this chapter.
Very true. And this is one thing that I can only fault Kaladin for so much, but it's still this is probably just the aspect of Kaladin's character that I don't like. I feel like I've said this before, and every time he ends up in a bad spot, he just gets like incredible amounts of disdain for the light eyes people, and that they're just the root of everything wrong, which is pretty true. But
For Kaladin, it's certainly
he
true.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But he just like always goes there and always gets in this rut. And there's a lot of allusion to the wretch being back, I guess, throughout all this. Which kind of made me sad. I was glad we got rid of that, you know. Um, but yeah, I like how direct Dalinar was, and Kaladin at least is starting to believe that Dalinar is still like an all right guy. Um, he's not the worst, but yeah, he does not like Elokar or any of the others at all. Like, cannot deal with them.
And I love how it ends. Well, not how it completely ends, because it does end on a rather dark note for Kaladin. But just before, it does try to inspire Kaladin to rise above this negative feelings that he has. And I really love what Dalinar says. I here he says this: "Be the kind of man that others admire, whether they be light-eyed or dark, or that a dark eyes can lead. That will change the world." And he's responding to Kaladin's frustration of saying, "Well, I'm a dark eyes. I'm always going to be downtrodden." And I love Dalinar's stance there of you want to change something, be the change. Stand up and be a man worthy of admiring and noticing. And I really love that sentiment or that piece of advice of if you think something's wrong, change it yourself. Don't just assassinate people to get your way. Do be in yourself the change that you want to see in the world, and I think that's powerful. I don't think Kaladin hears a word of it because, like we said, he's already checked out at this point. But powerful words there from Dalinar.
Yeah, checked out is a good word for it. Dalinar doesn't really know how personal he made the conversation when he brought up the name Roshon. And so
Yeah,
at this point, Dalinar is kind of talking to a brick, that talk to the brick wall meme.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening here. Kaladin is completely checked out. Any more thoughts on Kaladin before we move on to 2 Shallan chapters?
let's talk about Shallan.
All right. So Shallan has a Ghostblood mission, which she'll get instructions for here in a second. But before she does, she's having a span read conversation with Adolin. And did any of you catch this? I'm not gonna give you too many hints, but did there's a couple specific wording here with what Adolin's doing. Did either of you catch this?
I don't think I did. I mean, I just imagined two high schoolers texting back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
basically here in this hey, what are you up to? Oh, nothing much. Kind of idle. So it got me curious what I missed.
I before you explain, Trevor, I did want to say that that was interesting. I feel like we get a glimpse into what texting would have been like if that was a thing in like medieval times.
Right.
I can't say I've ever seen that, but it was funny. I thought the same thing.
All will be revealed by next week, maybe the week after. I don't remember how I'm splitting the chapters, but Adolin specifically says that he's bored and he would like her to come visit him because he can't visit her. And that's all I'll say.
Is he not like welcome in she's in Sabariel's camp,
She
right?
is in Sabariel's camp.
Is he just like not welcome there? That's my first thought. Either that or is I know they're starting this whole like Knights Radiant order. Is he like doing some kind of training or something with that and can't leave? I don't know. I did not catch that. Do you know, Elliot?
I don't. I totally passed over that and just assumed that he's busy with whatever plans, Dalinar is working on for his invasion of the Parshendi part of the Shattered Plains. So intrigued what Adolin's up to because yeah, I didn't read anything into that.
All will be
Maybe he's
revealed
just
in
busy
short
looking
time.
at his new. Maybe he's just busy looking at his new shard blades and plate and stuff.
Or his fashion magazines or whatever else he's got.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so they're riding back and forth. Shallan is keeping an eye on this hiding spot that the Ghostbloods told her to pick up instructions from. Little does she know the instructions are already there, and they were there before they even told her about it, so she's just wasting her time. But, which is explained later. But she finds Yatil in this, like, the floor below her doing the same thing that she's doing, waiting for somebody to walk up to the tree. And so she surprises her. They actually get off on a pretty good basis. Like obviously they don't really trust each other, but they're not killing each other, so that's good. And they do this mission-ish together. So either one, if you want to talk about this for a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a fun little chapter with Shallan teaming up with the creepy mask lady Yatil that at least I've been a little terrified of up until this point. So I was a little nervous when Shallan went down to confront her. I was like, you're gonna get yourself stabbed, Shallan. They're like, what are you doing? But you're right, it does work out pretty well ultimately, and is it off pretty cleverly, honestly. The whole thing from start to finish. She's getting pretty comfortable in this role of Veil, if you will. She's as clumsy or uncertain as she was when she was first, interacting with the Ghostblood. She's getting pretty confident.
She even plays Yatil off on the Ardents in the next chapter, like kind of seamless. Well, it is this chapter. Pretty seamlessly. She just kind of ad libs the whole thing and says, "Oh, my sister won't take her mask off. Please help." And Yatil's like, "Do not take my mask off." and it's not a joke for her. So Shallan puts Yatil in a situation where she can't follow her into the room, and she also gets an alibi from the Ardents, and so she actually plays this really well.
Oh, it's brilliant. And even beyond that, she is exposing Yatil to like the public.
Right.
She's getting a ghost blood some FaceTime, and that could be a weapon to use later on. Just the fact that now there's some Ardents that are going to remember, oh yeah, that weird mask person the other day. That alone could be a factor. She's starting to maybe weaken the Ghost Blood's secrecy just a little bit by that, and for her, making all of that up on the spot, like, as they were going in. That was quite the move. That was masterstroke.
Yeah. And we know
there's one comment.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Trevor.
Not all you.
There's one comment along the way there that I wanna actually point out. Shallan is talking to Yatil, trying to get a little bit of information out of her, and she makes some kind of offhand comment about how, oh, your master is such and such, and Yatil stops her and is like, hold on a second, you have that backwards. He's my student. And there's like, kind of awkward pause, and I as a reader, I awkward pause. Wait a second, is Yatil the like mastermind here, and Mraize is just the front,
Right.
the Mraize is actually the end. He's being put as the front one to that way if he gets assassinated, it's not much of a big deal. Like, is that what's going on? Lost it without dwelling on it too fast. But like, on a second, this maybe Yato is much bigger of a player than we thought at first.
Yeah. When she goes into this hospital room or the Ardent room or whatever monastery, she's meeting with Talenel, who we saw at the end of the Way of Kings. We saw in one of our interludes. She doesn't know who it is, and none of the we're assuming none of the Ardents know who it is, or even if Dalinar believes what he's saying, like, because he's claiming to be a herald, so we don't know if they actually believe him or whatever, but we know that he's Talenel, and he has a very interesting reaction to Shallan's light weaving. Did either of you catch this?
Oh, enormous reaction. This kind of like threw me back a little bit. So for one, this is something I was extremely excited for when it was kind of alluded to that that Shallan was gonna meet with Talenel'elin. I've been so curious about him. We haven't seen him right since the very end of the Way of Kings.
We saw him in one interlude, and he was being transferred from Kholinar, where he was at the end of the Way of Kings, to the Shattered Plains at Dalinar's request.
But
okay.
couldn't quite answer in that interlude was like, when did this happen? And this totally answers like all those questions. It's now. Talenel is here and Shallan is meeting him. So yeah.
True, which is great. So Shallan starts to surge behind, and Talenel just like gets up and like rushes at her, doesn't he? And like it's like what's I don't remember his exact like what he said and stuff, but he kind of just had a panic attack almost, like what are you doing and stuff, and then she stops and he kind of calms down, but he kind of like freaks out for a second.
Yeah,
which was weird to me. Out of everyone around, I guess I would guess that he's one of the most chill people with search finding, because he's probably one of the few people who like knows what it is and stuff. But maybe that's a big red flag that it's really bad or something. So I don't know what to make of it, but it was very noteworthy.
right.
It's definitely got to be big.
There's a couple
Definitely.
mentions. There's a couple mentions in here that I want to highlight between chapters 63 and 64. Gavilar's name is actually brought up more than once here by Yatil, by Amaram, who's about to walk through the door, and there's another character here, Borden, who was in the interlude bringing Talenel to the Shattered Plains, and he's one of Dalinar's men, but he's also walking in with Amaram. Borden is giving Amaram access to town. We don't know if that's with Dalinar's knowledge, because Dalinar seems to trust Amaram at this point, but we don't know what the relationship is there. Is Amaram hiding behind Dalinar's back to go see Talenel, and whose allegiance is Borden's? We don't know all of the politics there, but couple characters to key in on here.
Oh, I'm definitely coming out of this chapter assuming that Borden is Amaram's inside man here, because in the chapter 64, they're worried about the Ardents coming by and knowing that they're there. And those are Dalinar's Ardents,
Right.
So I think Borden is worried about word getting back to Dalinar that he just let Amaram in to see the guy that no one's even supposed to know is here.
Right.
So I took this as 100% Borden is one of Dalinar's trusted agents, but is actually in Amaram's pocket.
Right.
Okay, I have a thought slash question. It's a question if it can be answered. If not, then we'll just leave it where it is. Um, so Dalinar had Talenel brought from Kolinar to Shattered Plains, right?
Right.
Um, and Amariam is the head of the new Knights Radiant thing. It's very
Right.
possible, I feel like, that this isn't some insider job, that this is just, if anyone should get to know or talk to this guy, maybe it should be Amariam. I don't know if they. Right. So all the high princes, right? Shouldn't they know the herald, like who the heralds are, right? And this guy has like the same name. Shouldn't they be like at least curious? I'm assuming that's why they had this guy brought over,
Right.
because
So
he's at least peculiar.
this guy shows up to Kolinar claiming to be a herald with a shard blade. He has a shard blade, and obviously Dalinar hears about this, and so Dalinar has him shipped from. Everybody assumes he's crazy, and because
Hmm.
he's ranting the same thing over and over. But he has a shard
Of
blade, so they're
course.
trying to figure
Yeah.
out what that's about. So they ship him from Kolinar to the Shattered Plains so Dalinar could look into it.
Okay. I see. Okay. I could see it being either an insider thing or just simply like Amram could have known and just stopped by, or could have known from Dalinar, even though I know Dalinar's been cautious with Amarim, as well as Kaladin said, but I feel like they're still colleagues, right?
Right.
Since so, I guess my first thought wasn't towards Borden as an inside guy. I thought maybe like, he was just Dalinar's guy who knew about him, had been around and was like, "Yeah, I'll take you," kind of thing. But yeah, that was my first thought, at least.
I think that definitely could be the case. I think I'm still leaning towards he's the inside guy, but we'll see. Your point about Amaranth being the head of the new Knights Radiant does perhaps play into this, but I did I think of note of importance here is the fact that Amaram doesn't seem to question at all who this guy is. He seems to be like in awe of him, like absolutely accepting and agreeing that this is Talenel, the Herald, the guy.
Right.
We got the assumption before of maybe Dalinar, Elokar, everyone else. They're just thinking this guy's crazy. Like there's no way he could be the Herald. Amaram doesn't think that. Amaram thinks this is the real guy. And
Right.
so that's big. Why does Amaram jump to that conclusion when everyone else is jumping to the oh he must be insane conclusion? No, that no one else does.
Amarim's also been caught trying to figure out more about the Voidbringers, figure out more about the Parshendi, trying to get to the Shattered Plains, like Shallan and Yasna were. So Amaram certainly has ulterior motives that Dalinar's not aware of. It's just what does all that entail?
And maybe a hint at that has to do with the name that Trevor you already brought up, and that's Gavilar. Amaram says, and I quote, when he sees Talenel, he says, Gavilar, we have done it. Like, that's not a lot of words, but man, does that say a lot to me of Amaranth, of Gavilar, we have done it. Is that what Gavilar was trying to do that the Parshendi assassinated him for? Was Gavilar trying to bring back the heralds? Did he somehow figure out a way to summon them or bring them back? Is that what the Parshendi keyed into? And we're like, oh, we got to stop that. You're dying tonight, kind of thing. And somehow was Amaram in on that? Clearly, it seems like he was. That seems to be a pretty big revelation right there.
So if you remember back to the prologue of this book, Yasna walks in on her father Gavilar. Amaram is in the room, and two Parshendi are in the room. About 45 minutes later, Gavilar gets assassinated.
Yeah.
And the Parshendi said he should not have revealed his plans to us. So Amaram was there. And now fast forward here, Amaram seems to be celebrating something, that Talenel'elin is here or something. Also, Yatil is talking to Shallan in the previous chapter that why are you interested in Dalinar's random crazy person? Because Dalinar's loyal to the throne. And Yatil says, well, outwardly, yes. But his brother knew a lot of cool things, and we don't know how much Dalinar knows. So Gavilar's been being mentioned quite a bit here, with Dalinar, with Amaram, with Parshendi, all kind of together here. So
Paul, any thoughts on that before I take us to something slightly different?
Take us away.
All right. Some more information that could be equally big is honor blades. So we get two little hints here about way more information about what honor blades are. Shallan actually thinks to herself in the end of chapter 63 when she meets Talenel'elin and she realizes, oh, this guy is claiming to be a herald. She kind of runs through like, he can't be a herald. Heralds are supposed to glow like the sun and speak with voices and wield honor blades. Like, hold on a second. Full pause. Like, I missed it before, but I had not seen anything tying honor blades to the blades that the heralds wield before. That's huge. And then it practically gets confirmed in the very next chapter because Amaram is keying in on honor blades, and he mentions them, or they're referenced in conjunction with this treasure and this like Talenel, I guess, apparently said something about honor blades or a treasure being on the shattered plains, and Borden heard it but no one else did, or something like that. And so that's why Amram is here. He's trying to get Talenel to tell him where this stuff is, and they kind of walk out of the room saying something like, all right, let's go find this right now before someone else does. So this brings up a ton of questions for me. First off, is this true? Am I drawing the right conclusion here? Are those blades that we saw in the prelude, the ones that all got in the ground, except for Talenel's because he wasn't there, are those the honor blades? Is this a finite set of, those 10 blades? That's crazy. Two, what are the powers, associated with honor blades if this truly is, like of the heralds? If by wielding an honor blade, are you wielding like the power of a herald when you're doing that? And then lastly, I know I'm throwing out a lot of questions here, but lastly, we've theorized that Zeth is perhaps wielding an honor blade. Are we now talking about Zeth wielding like one of 10 honor blades, one of the blades of one of the 10 heralds? Like, mind blown. That's a crazy revelation.
right.
Paul, help me digest this. This could be nuts.
I'm really glad you're making these connections right now. And where my first thought is going is back to, I believe, the first time it's mentioned. Right, with the Parshendi, weren't they just like, oh, like, is that guy a Surge Binder? Oh, I hope
Mhm.
not. Like, I think it's just an honor blade.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure that was basically how it's presented. Like, oh, like he's probably not a Surge Binder. He probably just has an honor blade. Like, he's faking it or something. And this makes you think that honor blades are way cooler than even like Surge Binding,
Right.
and stuff like way, way, way beyond that. And I am very on board with the Zeth has an honor blade, in that it's the 10, like for the 10 heralds. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Let
So I could
can I
definitely
jump
stick
in
with
real
that.
quick?
But yeah, Char's gonna mess it up. Go ahead.
So now I do want to reaffirm some of what you're saying here. So the first time we see honor blades mentioned, the Parshendi are trying to rationalize Kaladin's surge binding that they just saw, and they're telling each other, no, it's probably just an honor blade. So that could be mistakable for an honor blade is surge binding. So we've had a lot of talk of are Szeth and Kaladin in the same order. Could Szeth have a Windrunner honor blade that gives him Windrunner powers, but Kaladin's an actual Windrunner, and so Szeth doesn't have to have a spren to do it. He just has the sword that Syl really doesn't like.
Two things.
Yes.
One, yes. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Like that would explain a lot. Right when Syl saw Szeth, she kind of had the assumption that he had no sprint.
Right.
And so this honor blade would kind of fill in that puzzle piece there. Two, next time Kaladin and Szeth meet, right? Kaladin's got to get that honor blade from him because he had the whole. Because if it's one of the Herald's blades, it's not like tainted like he views the Knight's Radiance, right? For betraying. I'm assuming he wouldn't feel the same way, right? That was his whole stipulation. I don't want to use a shard blade because of what happened with the Knight's Radiant. I like can't do that.
Right.
But if he got an honor blade, also that just raised another question for me. If he got an honor blade somehow, this is hypothetical, for a different order, could he then be a Windrunner and whatever the other one is? But
we're down a lot of what if trails. And
hypothetical, not
great
important.
question.
But if he got the Windrunner one himself, I think that would be really sick.
Does that make him like a super Windrunner?
Also, that's exactly what I was going to ask.
2.0.
Like, right. If he's Surgebinder plus Honor Blade, like, is this, double powers? This is craziness.
Maybe that's how he fights off the storm form Pershendi, He becomes Windrunner 2.0. And he pushes whenever they make the high storms and throw that on Kaladin, just pushes it back with his Windrunner 2.0s.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh man. I want to point out too, if we're drawing the right conclusions here, if we're thinking about honor blades in the right context, it truly is this set of 10 swords that were wielded by the heralds. I'm trying to think about, okay, where's the rest of them? Well, we know where one is because Talenel'elin had one. Showed up to Kholinar wielding a shard blade, which I guess we would be assuming would be his honor blade. Like, where did that go? We're assuming that Dalinar or Elokar or somebody has it, right? Like, kind of locked away in a vault, perhaps, or they put it in a box. Like, is somebody going to pick that up and get a bunch of surge binding abilities from Talenel's order, which I think we were even told recently what Talenel's order is, right? He's the Herald of the Stone Wards.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? He's regarded as the Stone Sinew, they said, right? And so I took that as being the Stone Ward Herald.
So if someone were to pick that blade up, has no one tried that yet? Would they, gain those abilities?
No, we don't know anyone picked it up. It could just still be there where he dropped it, and no one bothered to pick it up, right?
That's a little far fetched. You don't think someone would go for a shard blade?
I mean, we never. People don't mind. They're like, whatever.
So so where's that? Is that going to come into play? Is his shard blade or honor blade going to become a big factor into this? And I guess if we're thinking about this, where are the rest of the honor blades? It makes sense, I suppose, that Szeth could have gotten a hold of one if the heralds really did leave 9 of them just in the ground. Did people just kind of find those and they've been floating out in the world in various places, and there's 9 unaccounted for honor blades out there somewhere, and Szeth just happens to have one. Like that makes sense, I guess. There's if Szeth has one, then I guess there's 8 more that are bouncing around out there somewhere that somebody's gotten a hold of. Scary thought.
There's in my leatherbound, I won't get it out right now, but there's a really cool art piece in the leatherbound that's all that has the 9 swords in the ground. during the prelude. So it's some really cool artwork out there of the swords there.
So next time you'll have to show us, because you can't just say that and then never show us. So,
if I knew which volume it was,
it's really cool. I promise. Just imagine it, though.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Just take my word for it. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts on this episode?
I do actually. I have one more quote that I want to read. I've been reading a lot this chapter. I've got one more. This chapter 64 actually closes out with a cool quote from Shallan herself, which I think sums up a lot about where Shallan's at in her journey and where she's going. She's talking to Yatil. Am I saying that right now? No, I'm guessing myself.
Yep.
Yatil.
Yatil.
And yep. And she's like passing the information on to her, and then they're kind of parting ways. And Shallan says this: I seek the truth, wherever it may be, whoever may hold it. That's who I am. And I think that's a cool summary of, what Shallan's all about, right? She really is just trying to find the truth, and she's trying to, infiltrate the different places that she is to try and figure out who has the truth and who knows the truth and where she's at, what she can do with it. It's all about, figuring stuff out for her. I noticed though that the story of her is a little bit ironic as well, because she says she's all about truth and that she seeks the truth, but she sure uses a lot of deceit in her path of seeking the truth. She's lying to a lot of people, including herself, about who she is, all this kind of stuff in her pursuit of truth. So I know Pattern enjoys that irony, but it's something interesting thought to think about. I'm wondering if that's a Shallan thing, or if that's kind of maybe indicative of her entire order of light weavers. But I thought it was a cool quote that encapsulated a lot about who Shallan is right now.
And Yatil told her to get a Ghostblood tattoo.
Oh yes, she's accepted, right? It ends with her getting officially accepted into the Ghostbloods.
She says she can get it wherever. She just has to prove that she has it next time they see each other. So, which I guess for Shallan, couldn't she just light weave it on and then take it off later?
I was just thinking that, like, for Shallan, that's probably pretty easy. As long as she remembers to keep putting it on every time, she could create a tattoo illusion pretty easily, I bet.
Yeah. All right. Any closing thoughts, Paul, before I close this out?
Not necessarily about this chapter, but going forward.
Yeah.
This was a really fun week. But I would honestly say, other than the Talenel'elin stuff, it wasn't super groundbreaking. But we are getting pretty far into the book, and so I'm really hopeful with our next week, or maybe next 2 weeks, that things are really gonna kind of full force. I'm really hoping that we find out more about honor blades and stuff. So I'm very, very optimistic about our next few weeks here as we start to near the end of this book.
Cool.
Part 4 is what rocked our worlds in Way of Kings, so I have high expectations for part 4 of Words of Radiance.
It's true.
I as well.
Let's keep reading and find out if it meets them. Thanks for joining me this week, Paul and Elliot, and we will reconvene next week.
Let's do it.